In some places, absence makes a sound. A chair stays empty a little too long. A meal goes cold twice. A light in a bedroom stays off when it should be on. In Jincheng Town, in Jinning County, Yunnan Province in China, boys and young men began to vanish. Not in a single night, not in a single wave, but in slow-spaced intervals that allow daily life to continue almost undisturbed. A missing poster appears on a wall. The paper curls at the edges. Rain blurs the ink. Another poster replaces it. A neighbor says he probably went to the internet cafe. A relative says, give it time. A local police officer says, wait 24 hours and trust the police. Time becomes the quiet accomplice. Because in serial cases, time does not just pass. Time sustains momentum. Time protects repetition. This story is not only about the individual who committed the violence. It is about how fragments can accumulate without ever being assembled into a warning. Between 2008 and 2012, a series of disappearances occurred in Jincheng Town, Jinning County, China. Most of the missing were male. Many were adolescents or young adults. The geographic radius was small. The time window was often morning hours. Parents searched fields. Fathers walked riverbanks. Mothers waited at doorways long after sunset. Each family carried its own fear, but the cases did not converge. Each report was treated separately. Each absence was explained away. The pattern existed. It simply remained unconnected. On April 25, 2012, 20-year-old Han Yao went to work as usual. It was his 13th day at a geotechnical company. Around 7 a.m., he and his co-workers were dropped off near a worksite close to the South Gate ditch. Around 8 a.m., he was asked to walk back to the office to retrieve documents. The walk would take roughly 20 minutes. At approximately 9:10, he collected the documents. Instead of taking the main road back, he chose a shortcut. An older path behind the office, partially obstructed by discarded debris, lined with trees that narrowed the field of view. He did not return. By 10 a.m., co-workers began to notice. His phone was switched off. By evening, his bed in the dormitory remained untouched. At about 10 p.m., a co-worker called his family. His mother, Cheng Lian Yan, spent the night dialing a number that would not connect. The following morning, she reported him missing. She was told not to worry prematurely. He might have left voluntarily. He might be meeting someone. She knew that did not fit. At the disappearance site, she showed her son's photograph to an older man nearby. He said he had not seen Han Yao. Then he added something heavier. Other boys had vanished there too. None had returned. When she relayed this to the officers present, she later said she was told it was a rumor. That moment changed her role. She stopped being the only mother searching. She became a witness documenting. Other investigatory reports say that over the next 2 days, she visited other families. She collected written statements. She gathered photographs. She compared dates and locations, male youths, morning hours, the same stretch of land. Instead of returning to the same local station, she went to the media. On May 3, 2012, local coverage brought the disappearances to public attention. That evening, a special investigative task group was formed. In early May 2012, police detained Zhang Yongming. On May 9, authorities confirmed he was in custody. 2 days later, investigators excavated human remains from his residence and farmland. State media later confirmed 11 male victims between 2008 and 2012. In July 2012, Zhang was convicted of intentional homicide and sentenced to capital punishment. He was executed in the early of 2013. For the families, however, confirmation did not feel like closure. It felt like the end of waiting. Zhang Yongming lived in the same village as many of the families who were searching. Villagers described him as withdrawn and solitary. He rarely greeted others. He lived alone. He also had a documented history of severe violence. As a teenager, he attacked a friend and a classmate during a sleepover. The victim survived. A year later, he was convicted of unaliving a 16-year-old co-worker. He served nearly 2 decades in prison before his release in 1997. After his release, he returned to Nanmen village. He farmed land allocated to him. He walked the same paths as the youths who later disappeared. There were warning signs. Reports described at least one attempted strangulation that did not result in long-term detention. Families speak of incidents that were treated as isolated disturbances. In retrospect, these appear as missed intervention points. In real time, they were absorbed into routine. The ordinary is powerful. It allows what should feel urgent to fade into background noise. Serial harm often depends on fragmentation. Families were told to wait 24 hours, to assume voluntary absence, to check internet cafes. Meanwhile, disappearances clustered geographically and demographically. When media exposure escalated the issue, higher-level resources mobilized quickly. Multiple local officers were later reportedly disciplined for negligence. The system demonstrated that it could respond with urgency. The difficult question is why that urgency required public pressure. In serial cases, delay multiplies impact. To avoid speculation, let's keep the theoretical framing focused. Hans Eysenck's biosocial personality theory proposes that certain traits, especially high psychoticism, meaning emotional coldness, low empathy, and aggressive toughness, are associated with increased risk of violent behavior. Public reporting describes Zhang as socially detached and capable of repeated severe violence. Without clinical evaluation, no diagnosis can be made. But still, Eysenck's framework may offer a structured way to understand how predisposition may exist. Although predisposition alone does not create repetition, it becomes dangerous when barriers are low. Families describe repeated dismissal and fragmented case handling. When each disappearance is treated as independent, the system fails to aggregate risk. Institutional betrayal theory would explain the erosion of trust that follows when authorities minimize credible warnings. The mother who gathered evidence did not simply demand answers. She forced pattern recognition. The bystander effect may show how responsibility weakens when awareness is shared among many. Villagers noticed unusual behavior. Some knew of earlier incidents, yet collective intervention did not occur. Silence does not require cruelty. It may sometimes require diffusion. A person previously convicted of serious violence returned to the same community. Public documentation provides limited clarity about supervision or structured monitoring after release. That gap raises structural prevention questions. Together, these themes describe layered vulnerability rather than a single cause. It is easier to isolate the story inside one individual. It is harder to acknowledge that repetition requires space. Personality predisposition may explain capacity. Institutional delay explains duration. And community diffusion explains silence. Each layer alone is incomplete. Together, they form a corridor. When high-risk traits encounter weak institutional friction and dispersed responsibility, harm can persist longer than anyone anticipates. The sentence carried out in 2013 closed a legal chapter. It did not erase the years in which families searched alone. The case forces attention toward prevention, not spectacle. Not only who did this, but what conditions made continuation possible. In Jincheng Town, boys disappeared within a small radius over the years. They were not statistics. They were sons who helped in the fields, students who had just started new jobs, teenagers who were expected home for lunch, young men who carried ambitions that never had the chance to grow older. Behind every confirmed number was a bedroom left untouched, clothes that were never packed away, parents who measured time not in calendars, but in waiting. It is easy to let the case collapse into the name of the perpetrator. It is harder and more honest to remember the lives interrupted. Each disappearance created a circle of impact. Families who stopped sleeping through the night, neighbors who began walking in pairs, a town that learned to look over its shoulder. And yet for years, those circles never overlapped enough to become collective alarm. So the question this case leaves is not only about one individual's capacity for harm. It is about thresholds. How many missing reports should it take before a system assumes pattern rather than coincidence? How many warning signs should it take before supervision is reconsidered? How many near incidents should it take before precaution outweighs procedural delay? When authorities ask families to wait, what is the cost of that waiting? When communities notice something unusual but stay silent, what is the weight of that silence? We often believe prevention requires extraordinary heroism. In many cases, it requires something quieter: documentation, escalation, taking discomfort seriously. If you lived in that village and heard that another boy had vanished, at what point would you decide it was no longer isolated? If you were responsible for reviewing those reports, at what point would you decide delay was no longer acceptable? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are also necessary ones. Because honoring the victims does not end with remembering their names. It continues with asking what would have protected them sooner. And in any community, including our own, the real measure of safety may not be how quickly we punish harm. It may be how early we are willing to admit that a pattern is forming. Because sometimes the most dangerous moment is not when violence happens. It is the moment before it happens again, when everyone has seen enough to know and still chooses to wait and do nothing.